So Proposition 14, you might have heard it referred to as the jungle primary. You might have referred to it as the top two primary. But what's most fundamental and why it's revolutionary is that it's a non-partisan primary. You want to talk about voter disenfranchisement? New York disenfranchises every independent voter simply because they exercise their First Amendment right not to join a private political party. If we're going to take a first step, let's take a step back and say, when the state gets involved, whether it's California or New York or Florida, in conducting elections and taking my tax dollars to run an election process, what a novel concept is that we treat everybody the same.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to On the Fringe. This is Dave. I'm here with Gavin,
Howdy.
and we have a special guest today. So we are excited and privileged to be talking today with Chad Peace. Chad is the legal strategist for the Independent Voter Project. He's the founder and president of IVC Media. We could be talking to Chad today about entrepreneurship or digital marketing or targeting or building a personal brand, but we're going to be talking to him today about voting and about the growing group of Americans that see themselves as being independent voters and essentially not getting the representation that they need from the two big political parties in the United States. So, Chad, thanks a lot for joining us on the show today.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. So, we're going to start this thing off with talking about Proposition 14 that came out in 2010. And this was an earthquake to the political system in California, correct? Can you just walk us
Yeah.
through a little bit what Proposition 14 did for California and just introduce it to some of our listeners who may not be aware of what Proposition 14 actually is?
Right. So Proposition 14, you might have heard it referred to as the jungle primary. You might have referred to it as the top two primary. But what's most fundamental and why it's revolutionary is that it's a non-partisan primary. The fundamental nature of that and the distinction is significant, and that almost every state, when you have partisan primaries, the legal purpose of the primary, it's not to do anything for the voters per se. The legal purpose is to select nominees for a political party to place onto the general election ballot. What California did and a few other states have done, like Alaska and Washington, when you create a nonpartisan primary, you change the legal purpose of it. A nonpartisan's primary, the purpose is for all the voters, regardless of party, to nominate candidates to be on the general election ballot. Now, what's fundamentally different, and I'm actually surprised those in the quote unquote voting rights world don't take up this mantle more. I don't know where the ACLUs of the world are these days, but I say it's most simple. California, with a nonpartisan primary, is one of the only three states that treat every voter and every candidate exactly the same. It's called equality, right? Whereas you can go to New York, dominated by Democrats. They could change their election laws tomorrow on a whim if they want to. But the reality is, when you join the Democratic Party in New York or the Republican Party in Florida, you get more rights because you get to participate in these primary elections, and the people who chose not to join the party don't get to participate. So, most simply, Prop 14, we took flack from everybody. The Democratic Party hated it. The Republican Party hated it. And guess what? Even the third parties hated it, right? And we said, look, guys, this is not about parties. It's party agnostic. I'm not anti-party. I'm party agnostic. It's the election process, the public election process, and say, hey, if we're going to take a first step, let's take a step back and say, when the state gets involved, whether it's California or New York or Florida, gets involved in conducting elections and taking my tax dollars to run an election process, what a novel concept is that we treat everybody the same and we don't give party voters and candidates special rights that other people don't get. That's Prop 14.
So, do you think that that has been the core of a lot of the backlash to Prop 14,
Of course.
particularly because I know it got a lot of press at the time, and I know it's gotten a lot of press in the last couple of months because of the California primary.
Right.
But there was a pretty long chunk of time where we didn't hear anything about it.
Right.
Is it just when the parties feel that something's on the line for them that this becomes an issue, in your opinion, or do you think there's something else there?
Oh, I mean, they've been trying to get rid of it from the day it passed, right? And every election,
Hmm.
every cycle they go through and they'll try to get, something through the legislature placed on the ballot and, try to get rid of it. The problem is it's so popular. When you ask at the voter level, it's so popular. And then we're in a Democratic state. So it's even worse for the Democratic Party because their own voters, it's actually Republicans are less likely to support it than Democrats, right? So it's very popular. So they're thinking, how do we get rid of it? This old national narrative about two Republicans might be on the general election ballot is a total bullshit narrative. They manufactured it, okay, because you had some early polls that showed that it was Hilton and Bianco in the lead, which none of us knew. I mean, all of us that could read a poll knew that didn't mean anything because you had 30%, 40% undecideds at that point, which were all the Democrats because there's such a big field they hadn't decided. The Republicans had already decided, right? So all you
Hmm.
do is go down like one crosstab and read a poll, right? So you have these folks who they know how to read a poll. They knew this was bullshit, but they're going and they're doing interviews with the press, and the press doesn't ask them what the press cites them as if they're this nonpartisan, data expert, and they get spun and they go and nationally, I guess we got to start getting people from everywhere from Idaho to Florida. Oh my God, California might have two Republicans in the runoff, which I'd say one, if that happened, that's what the voters voted for. But two, it was never going to happen. It wasn't going to happen. And so it was manufactured as an opportunity for them to everything they do. Look at how they got rid of Prop 50, the Independent Redistricting Commission. All they do is run it and say, look, take away your right to draw the districts. Let us politicians draw the districts again, because if you don't, then Trump's going to take over the world, right? And I'm not pro-Trump, anti-Trump. I like try not to talk about it because we're talking about the election process, right? But my point is, what they'll do is they see something they don't like and they'll put it into the two-sided narrative and try to convince people that this is that part of the narrative. This is part of the evil side. And right now, they're actually frustrated that we ended up with a Republican and a Democrat. I would say the reason now, after 12 years, they had such hair on fire about this is because in most states they kind of know who's going to win. It's their guy or their gal, and they can kind of control. Well, in California, the political operatives, there's a lot more uncertainty. They didn't know who's going to come out in this thing. Why? Because the voters were in control, not a bunch of party operatives that decide which candidate's going to get the money, which candidate's going to get the endorsement. Then we can send out our member communications telling all our voters who to vote for. And what we don't have to worry about those dang independent voters because you know what? We use the power and force of the state to tell them you're not allowed to participate at this process, which by the way, you funded, because it's our turn to select our nominee and you can come out and join us in November.
And
And
just
do
to kind
you
of
think,
piggyback off, oh,
yeah, no, you go ahead,
I'm
Dave.
not
just to,
biased. I'm not
no,
biased.
I was going to say, just to piggyback a little bit off of what you were saying and a little bit more clarity. So I live in Texas, and Texas recently had a primary election, and then there was a runoff between two Republican candidates. And the candidate who actually won, Attorney General Ken Paxton, we're not going to get into who this candidate is and who he ran against, John
Get
Cornyn.
into it.
But there were less people that showed up to vote in the runoff, and John Cornyn in the primary, it looks like this is according to fairvote.org, had 907,000 votes in the initial election. In the actual runoff, Ken Paxton had 885,000 votes. So Ken Paxton won the runoff with less people than John Cornyn had in the primary.
Right.
And this is something I think the political system in Texas is essentially becoming or trying to become a one-party state where the Republicans keep
Right.
control of the state and keep control of the state legislature and the executive branch of the state. But the voters that are in Texas should not have to choose between these two candidates. Texas voters should be able to choose within the Republican Party other people coming out on the ballot that They may not have the backing of Donald Trump, or they might not have the backing of the governor, but they should still be able to have their voices heard across the state.
Right. So, I
Or
mean, Texas isn't the worst offender, but they're trying to become a worst offender, right? So, Texas does have open primaries because they have a historically, right, saying, why do I need to register my party with the state, right? I think that's a very conservative position, right? Like, why do I need to tell the government what party I'm from, right? But they have partisan-based primaries. So, in one sense, right, it's good, it's open. It's not like New Jersey that says, tell me what your party is, and if we don't like it, you don't get a vote, right? But you do have to kind of salute to the party during the primary and declare a loyalty to the party in the primary. Now, what's interesting, one on to your point, they have the runoff in a low turnout election. We believe it should be the opposite, right? Which is why top two. They used to compare it to Louisiana, which had really they had a nonpartisan election with a runoff after, right? So it was a fundamentally different system because the election electing candidates in a runoff, you have lower turnout, right? So the partisan
Mm.
interests have an advantage there. What's interesting, what's going on in Texas right now is like the epitome of how this is a nonpartisan issue. You have Paxton. Okay, I don't like picking on people, but I'm gonna pick on him because he's loud and he prides himself on his conservativeship. You have the conservative Ken Paxton, where his private party in a meeting of I'm being facetious, but say 5 or 6 people went and decided, hey, we don't like Texas's open primary. We want to close it. We want to use taxpayer money to fund our private election and not let other people participate. Well, Ken Paxton, Mr. Attorney General of Texas, says, you know what? I agree with my private organization that I'm a part of in my private capacity. I'm not even going to defend Texas's laws, even though I'm the Attorney General, because I'm going to go and take the side of my party. That's what he did. So he abrogated his position as the Attorney General and said, I'm not going to defend it. I know I'm the Attorney General, but you know what? I agree with the plaintiffs in this case. So what's happened is the Secretary of State, Jane Nelson, also a Republican, stepped in his shoes to defend it. And her position is I represent the state of Texas. We have a long history of an open primary. If you're going to close your primary, now you have to declare your party with the state. That's not part of our right. And more so, we're representatives of the state, not our party in our these capacities. So two Republicans, totally different positions. You have Jane Nelson coming in
Mm.
and defending, doing Paxton's job while Paxton's running for an election, right? And it just goes to show you how nonpartisan this issue really is, right? There's Democrats who believe in everybody gets to vote. There's Republicans who believe in everybody gets to vote. And our position is there's lots of ways to design an election process, but the fundamental premise has to be that all voters are treated the same. And unless you have a process where all voters are treated the same, you're giving an unfair advantage to private and political and special interests that shouldn't have a special advantage in our election process because the election should serve the public.
Now, I completely agree, by the way, but that we've just touched on two cases in California and in Texas
Hmm.
where there was sort of well, there was a push for Proposition 14, there was a push for election reform, and then in Texas, there's sort of been a push against
Hmm.
keeping the election open. If we look nationally, not in terms of national elections, but in terms of local and state elections on the national level,
Hmm.
do you see the general movement as a pushback against open elections or a push for more open elections in the California model?
I mean, that's a good question. I would say right now there is a battle that is kind of going like a seesaw, right?
Mm.
You have, forces trying to pull Texas back, right? And you have forces and look, a great example is in DC, right? DC on the local level had partisan elections, which is unusual. New York does the same thing, and they had closed primaries. And the reform groups, which are growing, to your question, right, are growing, finding each other. There's a realignment of folks because in this space, it's like, wait, I'm not used to working with these people and stuff.
Mm.
But in DC, in one election cycle, passed open primaries and ranked choice voting. I should say semi-open primary. That's a whole nother conversation. But the council went ahead and they funded the ranked choice voting part, but they didn't want to fund the open primaries part. They just decided, oh, we don't have the funds to do the open primary, which,
That's wild.
right? But so you have the folks on the ground, Lisa Rice and a group of folks that passed this with 74% of the vote. Like this
Wow.
didn't pass 51%, it passed 74%, made hay of it. And guess what? Literally last week said, oh, okay, we'll go ahead and fund the open primary part of it, right? So that's going on. They passed Alaska did something very similar, passed what's called a
Mm.
top four system, which is like California, except they advanced four instead of two, which, by the way, I think that's a progression. That's even better, right? You know, Trump went on his Twitter tirade about how he hates it and everything. Why? Because he can't. I'm not saying this because Trump's such a terror. I'm saying just as an operative, he doesn't like it because he doesn't get to control the outcome. It's the same reason the forces that control California, the Democratic forces, want to get rid of top two and will be the largest opponents against our efforts to advance to a more Alaska style system with a top four or top five. They just want to be able to pick the winners. And it doesn't matter if it's Donald Trump and the Republicans in DC or it's the Democrats and labor forces in a municipality like New York. Look at New York passed ranked choice voting. It was a big thing, and everybody goes, "Oh, that's who you support." And others ranked. We talk about it like in a box, like everything, every ranked choice voting thing is the same. Well, why did they implement it in a closed primary and not in the general election? It tells you everything you need to know. They said,
Yeah.
"Okay, we'll adopt this ranked choice voting, but only in a closed primary election and not in the general." Because then at least we know the Democrats are still have a monopoly over New York, right?
It also makes whoever you put forward more competitive by the time you get to that.
Mm.
Mhm.
It
So
does.
you have
So
even more of an advantage.
And it's
correct.
more
Well,
predictable too.
right. And so people ask me, well, then you don't support it? I go, well, I support it. Like that's better than not. And it's
But
introduced.
if you're going to do it in the primary, why aren't you doing it in the
Right. I'm
general?
saying, well, why did you stop there? Why did you give this advancement to one group of voters, but then the rest of
Mm.
them, you're going to go into a general election, their vote's not going to matter when you could apply the same logic and say, let's have general elections with it too. Well, once you do that, then you introduce competition amongst the powers that be.
Mm.
So it's very complex. There's a lot of different sides of it, and that's the hard part about advancing the reform conversation is we tend to look at elections through the eyes of who got elected, right? Oh, I liked that outcome, therefore I like the system. Where you kind of you got to be outcome agnostic if you're focusing on the rules, right? You put the 3-point line further back and then your team doesn't win because you don't have a good 3-point thrower, like you can't, oh, I don't like that. It's like, you got to focus on the rules and making them fair, and then whoever wins wins, right? But that's just not the reality of how things work from the national to the local media. They're always going to focus on, well, this person won, therefore that election system produces outcomes like that.
You look at the actual number of people that are voting in primaries versus generals versus you have runoffs as well.
Hmm.
And it's low. I mean, voter turnout is generally pretty low in primaries and in runoffs. It's very, very low. And I
Hmm.
think that there shows there is a problem with the actual system in place because if people aren't showing up to vote, they're going, I don't have any incentive to actually take time off to spend time to go and actually make a decision because this decision that I make, well, it's not going to make a huge difference and a huge change in my life. It's already baked in there. The system is already set, the recipe's already made, and I'm just going to show up and I'm essentially just rubber stamping whoever's going to be actually winning
So,
this.
so think of the absurdity of this, right? I'm dealing with these guys, and they do their tweets about us being this. They want to I mean, one of them tweeted the other day, the undo the top two, that dark money special interest group at IVN wants to maintain their power. And first of all, I mean, what power do I have? Like um, but by, maintaining this top two, these people, California had a almost, 35, almost 40% turnout in a primary. And you say, well, that's low. Like we should have more than that. Look at New York, 9%. And that's not unusual, right? California's top two nonpartisan primary produced a much higher turnout than in most places. And you know what? Independents came out in record numbers at almost, they're gonna, by the time they do the final numbers, it's gonna come out close to 28% of independents who are, that's in California, that's almost 2 million voters. Where if you go to New York, by law, the government has said you're not allowed to vote. And then we talk about the disenfranchisement that may occur from this, this or that or whatever. You want to talk about voter disenfranchisement. New York disenfranchises every independent voter simply because they exercise their First Amendment right not to join a private political party. They disenfranchise them completely and they take their money to go and operate that election, right? So the issue is the folks that control the narrative and that control the levers and are working with the people who are currently in office, right? They put things out there that the reform community, right, has to work up against. We have to work up the history and the national narratives and, this whole thing about people aren't focused on the fundamental nature of the nonpartisan primary. They're focused on the narrative that, oh my God, it almost produced two Republicans,
Mm.
which was manufactured in the first place.
Again, it's the focus on outcomes as opposed to the system.
Correct.
But as you're pointing out, it's really a focus on hypothetical outcomes.
A
I mean, I think you
yeah,
see,
yeah, it's a hypothetical that everybody knew wasn't going to happen. But you know what?
but
If they write a press release and they go on a press binge strong enough and they go and pay a pollster to manufacture an outcome, like they want it, and because they assert their credentials that they frankly shouldn't have. I know, maybe this will come back to haunt me for saying it, but like I'm going to say it publicly. I know for a fact, I won't name names yet, but there is a data person referred to all the time by the New York Times, the Washington Post. Literally, they refer to him as nonpartisan data expert, blah, blah, blah. Bullshit. He's an operative of the Democratic Party. His company has exclusive arrangements with the Democratic Party. And frankly, it's dishonest. And then people wonder, oh, why don't we trust the news? Because these guys literally won't do the interview unless the journalist cites them in such a way. And we have a state of news where the journalists agreed to do that. I know this for a fact. That's what happens. And it's sad, but there's groups of us that are gonna, working on trying to change the narrative.
Yeah, this is where podcasts and this is where media like IVC and YouTube come into play because people are essentially going, this is untrustworthy. Everything that I see is essentially trying to sell me some sort of a narrative or sell me some sort of a story that's been manufactured. And
Right.
people essentially want the truth. And people want to have some sort of control over what happens in their lives instead of just having a story given to them and saying, yeah, we need you to just continue moving on and continue moving forward with
Yeah.
how you're living your life.
Right. And it's funny. So when you go and you look at these guys and they say, so you say you don't like top two because it might have produced this unusual outcome. But notice what their solution is. Their solution's not to go and, okay, well, let's advance more candidates or let's adopt a ranked choice. Their solution's to go back and do things in states that are in much worse conditions than we are, right? It's like, oh, let's go follow what they're doing in a state that has 9% turnout and no competition in the general election. And so they'll focus on a hypothetical outcome and then offer a solution, but totally disregard the unusual outcomes that happen literally 100% of the time with those elections because every election produces an unusual result because only this many people are voting.
Well, thank you. I mean, thank you for that. And just thank you for talking about this today because it's always educational, if not a little bit depressing, when we talk about these things. But before we move on, I didn't talk about it because I it's a whole different conversation. But ranked choice voting in America, that's kind of a separate conversation.
Hmm.
Do you see that advancing maybe more than the sort of open primaries we're talking about? Or do you think it's very much part of the same battle?
I think it's the same battle, and
Hmm.
then and I think they have to be the same battle. They're two separate sides of the same battle. Look, we I wouldn't say we were at odds. I come from out of the IVP. We did the top two primary, right? So we obviously come from the hey, let's focus first on treating voters the same. Okay. And then you have the ranked choice voting world, which is okay, let's give voters more choices, right? Those are not in conflict. In fact, I think they're very complementary. There was a point in time when the ranked choice folks wrote op-eds against the top two folks, right? When we were passing Prop 14. Okay. Since that time, I was part of the group that formed an organization called the National Association of Non-Partisan Reformers. I sit at the table with the ranked choice voting folks, and guess what? We're pretty good friends. And I think we understand each other more, and that's how things like Alaska came about. We said,
Hmm.
wait, what do you mean? I actually think so. Ranked choice, this is where I can get some flack from the ranked choice votes. I think there can have an unintended consequence on ranked choice voting where it actually comes back and people get a bad view of it. For example, when you try to implement ranked choice voting without a narrowing process, right?
Hmm.
You can end up with ballots that 30, 40 candidates on them, right? The effect of that on the ranked choice voting can be significant because you can get ballot exhaustion, you can get burn off, you can get, right? And then you can end up with results that aren't really majority. And then beyond that, the media, if you have 30 people, even in a ranked choice voting environment, it's still easy to ignore. Oh, that's just candidate 15. We don't got to talk about them.
Hmm.
Our view is ranked choice voting is great, but you'd need to have some kind of narrowing process. Now, how you do that and how you can make it most fair is another question. But our belief is you have to have a narrowing process to, some four, five, because then when you have that number, you can't ignore any of them. The media can't ignore them, and then the voters, you can have as enough, you can rank as many people as you can see there, right? And there's not this exhaustion of, oh, what is all. And
Hmm.
so that's my biased view. But to your question about do you see ranked, I think it's an advancement where, Maine passed ranked choice voting, and now they're trying to work on open primaries.
Hmm.
California passed nonpartisan primaries, and now there's an effort to advance more and bring ranked choice voting. So I think some of it will advance one side here, another side here. There's places like Alaska and DC that'll advance them both at the same time. But I think that's all part of the maturation of the space and the understanding. And I think ultimately, when primaries came into to be at the turn of the great, it was the last great progressive era. It was a couple states did this, does this, and then it was like bang, all of them brought the primaries into the public process. I think it'll be similar with the election reform is that we're in a testing phase and a trying phase, and you're going through what makes sense here in Maine and what makes sense here in Alaska and what makes sense here in California. There's going to
Hmm.
be things that are tested, they don't work, the battle wins, they lose, whatever, but at some point the electorate in general will get accustomed and have these general sense of awareness. And I think both of those initiatives will be part of the next advancement of how we look at elections in our democracy.
Well, again, thank you so much for being here today. I again just learned a lot, and it's interesting to see the sort of the state of the nation when it comes to these various initiatives. Dave, want to lead us out?
Yeah. So thank you guys very much for listening to our episode. And again, Chad, thanks a million for jumping on. If you enjoyed the episode and you're listening to it on Apple Podcasts, please give us a star rating. Our podcast has grown a lot in the last couple of months, and we appreciate all of the help from our listeners and our growing on the fringe community to helping us expand our network and our audience. And Gavin, what time is it?
Well, it's not election time.
Uh,
I think it's button time.
It's button time? All right, we're gonna hit that button. Thanks, y'all. I found it.